Hello again, and for those who don't remember me, my name is, of course, Alexander Foster, and today we are back to talk about our policy position based on how we should require every U.S. citizen upon turning the age of 21 to try alcohol, marijuana, and cocaine. Now, since we last spoke, my opponent and I have given our positions, and now that I have reviewed their stance a little more. While there are things I agree with, there are obviously things I disagree with, and that would be better solved under my position. Now, things that I do not agree with include trying all three of these substances in one weekend setting, having multiple people involved, including both participants and professionals, as well as their general reasons for wanting to implement this policy and whether or not that in and of itself is worth it. Now let's start with the first one of trying all three substances in one weekend setting. Now, while the degree to which you are trying each substance is not very high, the fact that you're doing all three of these substances in about a 2 to 3 day setting or span of time is not really good on someone's body, especially since you're mixing alcohol and drugs. And mixing alcohol and drugs, even in a minimal amount, cannot be good for each person. You can have very adverse effects depending on the person, and no amount of pre-checkups, either health or psychological, can necessarily determine if you are going to have an adverse reaction or not. So we should not have everyone try these in one weekend. Instead, you should space them out, as I stated in my plan, and do one at a time, whether it's a week apart or a month apart. Just whatever would work at everyone's convenience. Now, to address the second point of there are just too many people involved in my opponent's plan. What I mean by this is that, for at least the first part, I would say having too many professionals is not very cost effective for what you're ultimately doing. What you are having people do is try substances. You do not need many professionals on staff to do that. All you really need is to have that person be checked by a medical professional and a psych professional. So you need at least two separate people to check them up if there's not one person that's qualified to do both, but we're going to have two just to be safe because it's just easier to do that, and it's better to have multiple opinions as it is. Secondly, you would need someone. If they're not comfortable let's just say you don't have the person do it at their residence. Let's just have someone. Then you have at least one person to house them. Okay, so that's at least 3 people. My opponent's plan is having you have multiple people on site to monitor and check them and record all these results. For my plan, you would only need before the actual testing of the substances 2 to 3 people. And these are people that would already be well acquainted with the individual. They would already be comfortable with them. So there would be no added pressure or stress. Now, the other issue is that you would have multiple people trying the substances alongside this person. Now, my opponent was not very clear on how these people would be situated in the warehouse as they stated. For all we know, they could be very openly walking around, interacting with everyone, or they could be jailed in cells. It's probably somewhere in the middle where they're relatively separated and have some contact with other people, but while doing the actual substances are kept away from each other. But we don't really know that. The details are a little dicey there, and that's kind of an issue, especially in the fact that everyone interacts with everyone differently. So there might be people who are very stressed out about trying these substances who don't want to be around other people. And then you have the other people who would want to be around as everyone as possible and turn it into what is effectively a rave in the end. So we want to try to keep people as comfortable as possible. That's why my plan of just having everyone try them in their own homes or wherever they live is just ideally it's the easiest option, and it's also a much safer option. And this kind of rolls into my third point of why I do not believe my opponent's reasoning is enough to really warrant implementing this policy, and why my reasoning is logic behind this makes more sense. My opponent states that they want to eliminate the stigma surrounding drugs and alcohol and have people talk about it more, have a more open discussion, and make it seem like a less of a taboo area to talk about. So my issue with this is that with the way they want to implement this, it just seems like a very large amount of cost and resources that is going towards something that could be done far less. With my plan, I feel like my plan is both more cost effective in terms of it's just going to cost less to implement, on top of the fact that my reasons for why this is a good idea to implement just produces much more useful results. My whole goal with this policy is to test the limits of human addiction and human tolerance. So by doing this, we are having people learn their tolerance and like what levels they can go to with a certain substance before becoming addicted or not being able to handle it anymore. We are learning so much more that can help people in the psychological and medical field deal with people who are becoming addicted later in their lives. On top of the fact that this also does help lower the stigma surrounding drugs and other substances. By having people be more used to it and try it, they're going to have much less ability to be able to talk about this. My opponent believes by just having people try a very minimal amount of these substances that people are going to suddenly be more willing to talk about it and not hate them as much. But at least with my policy, if you take people to at least a level of euphoric high or to a more destructive level in the sense that they are going to feel much harsher physical effects, then people will actually realize that these drugs or other substances are not necessarily bad in their own right, and that we should be more open to talking about whether it's okay to use them, whether it's safe to use them. With my policy, I believe it is both better, safer, and just easier, on top of being cost effective, to implement my policy over my opponent's policy. As my opponent had stated they would want everyone to try them and try each substance, marijuana, alcohol, and cocaine in one go, have multiple people involved that are just too unnecessary, and their reasoning is just not practically cost effective for what is going to be needed to implement a policy such as this. Thank you for listening to my points. Have a good night.